Here we go with Sunday Morning Futures. Check it out.
Good Sunday morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Futures. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Today, President Trump floods the field with a litany of new policies to rein in inflation and interest rates here at home while driving policy across the world, all in the name of national security. Coming up, Senate Commerce Committee Chairman and member of the Senate Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees, Texas Senator Ted Cruz on taking on Iran, Venezuela, and China amidst a crackdown on dissent in Iran. Along with former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Trump, Victoria Coates, on next steps as the president zeroes in on acquiring Greenland to protect America from adversarial fire. Plus, Senate Foreign Relations, Banking, and Housing and Urban Affairs Committee member, Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty, on the Trump agenda playing out across the world. As Democrats melt down over the president's bold agenda and consistent success, and evidence emerges of their dirty tricks used to stop him. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan is here on Jack Smith's public testimony this Thursday after spying on his political rivals, including a sitting president, Donald J. Trump. Plus, ICE Director Todd Lyons will join us on protesters in sanctuary cities attacking federal law enforcement officers trying to keep America safe. It's all right here, right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And we begin this Sunday morning with President Trump's bold and unapologetic agenda, driving policy across the globe with U.S. national security at its core. President Trump over the weekend slapping tariffs on several European nations effective February 1st until a deal is in place for a, quote, complete and total purchase of Greenland. This while calling for new leadership in Iran after Iran's deadly crackdowns on protesters. Reports of up to 20,000 people dead as the exchanges between Iran's supreme leader and President Trump sharpen. Protesters demanding freedom against the brutal regime appear to have slowed this morning after Ayatollah Khomeini unleashed the use of deadly force. President Trump told the Iranian people he is with them and that help is on the way, sparking a response from Khomeini on X this weekend, claiming to blame President Trump for the nationwide protests that began over soaring inflation in Iran, a collapsing currency, and crippling U.S. sanctions. Military sources tell Fox News at least one U.S. aircraft carrier is being moved toward the Middle East as President Trump weighs his options on Iran. There are currently some 30,000 U.S. troops in the CENTCOM region right now. Exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi joined me here exclusively last weekend. Watch.
This is an opportunity to liberate that nation. Remember, the same thugs that hate America also hate their own people. And this is an opportunity to help a nation that starves for liberty, that starts to be rejoined with the free world, and to have the same relationship that we had with America before this revolution occurred.
Joining me now in the Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is Texas Senator Ted Cruz, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Maria, good morning. Good to be with you.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, Senator. Let's start with Iran, where dissent right now is being punished. I want to get your take on what President Trump should do regarding Iran.
Well, Maria, I have to say we are living in extraordinary times. The change that is occurring across the globe exceeds anything we have seen in decades. There is a very real possibility that in the next 6 months, the regimes in Iran, in Venezuela, and Cuba will all fall. There is a real possibility that Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba will all democratically elect new leaders, and instead of fomenting violence, fomenting attacks on America, instead of waging war on America, there is a real chance in the next 6 months that the people of those three countries will elect leaders who embrace freedom and free enterprise and who want to stand with America. And I got to say, if that happens, it is difficult to think of anything more consequential. You have to go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall and to America winning the Cold War without firing a shot to find a time as pivotal as where we are right now. If you look at Iran, Iran for 50 years has been the world's leading sponsor of terrorism. They have paid for and funded 90% of the funding of Hamas comes from Iran. 90% of the funding for Hezbollah comes from Iran. Iran funds terrorists all across the globe, including sending terrorists to, among other places, Venezuela, and targeting Americans. Right now, there are over 1 million Iranians that are showing unbelievable courage, standing up against this tyrannical regime. And I got to say, President Trump, I think, has been very strong in telling the regime, number one, we stand with the people. Do not target, do not murder the protesters, telling the protesters, America stands with you. And I got to say, just in the last 2 days, a really important step occurred where President Trump came out unequivocally and said, it is time for new leadership in Iran. Yes. It is time for the Ayatollah Khamenei, his religious dictatorship, to end. I think that's massively important.
So what happens next? Because as you know, Senator, first the president said help is on the way and then pulled back a bit with this expectation that the killings have stopped. At that point, thousands of people had already been killed. And the people on the streets are hoping that the United States does something. Would you endorse that the U.S. goes in and takes action?
Well, look, I think the U.S. should be taking every step possible to end this regime. The Ayatollah Khamenei hates America. He regularly leads massive mobs chanting death to America. In fact, every year in Iran, they celebrate as a holiday Death to America Day. It's the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution and taking over the U.S. Embassy in 1979. And so the reason that President Trump ordered a B-2 attack on Iran's nuclear facilities is he made the right decision as commander-in-chief that if that theocratic dictator got nuclear weapons, the odds were unacceptable that he would use nuclear weapons to murder thousands or even millions of Americans. That was the single most important foreign policy decision the president has made this second term. And when it comes to the protest, I think what is most important is making clear that America is with the people. Contrast this to 2009. 2009, you had the so-called Green Revolution in Iran. The Iranian people were rising up there. But Barack Obama made a very different decision. He was a new president. He decided that America stands with the regime, stands with the Ayatollah, and they discouraged the protests, and we wasted that opportunity. Right now, the president has made clear, he made clear to the Ayatollah, if you are murdering the protesters, you will pay the price. He called on the Iranian people, make a list of everyone engaged in acts of violence. Look, that is powerful because it causes the IRGC members, the soldiers, to pause and think before they carry out those murders. I hope and believe that America is doing everything we can to support the protesters on the ground. There are lots of steps we can and should be taking short of a bombing strike. And I have every belief that if the Ayatollah engages in mass murder against the protesters, that President Trump will order direct military responses. So this is a moment where the Ayatollah and mullahs, I think they're fundamentally weakened. They are weakened by the fact that last year they lost a war. And you know, sometimes people forget there are real world consequences to losing a war, not just communication, not just messaging, but real world. In the 12-day war, they utterly and completely lost it. If you're a dictator, your strength depends on convincing your people that you are invulnerable, that you cannot be beaten. Even worse than losing a war, if you're an Islamist dictator, is losing a war to Israel. That's what happened to the Ayatollah, which is why I predicted months ago we would see what we're seeing now, the Iranian people rising up with President Trump's support. I think we're at a moment of pivotal change.
But, Senator, the Iranian government doesn't want anyone to see what's going on the ground. I saw one report that if you go out in the street right now in Iran and you're a protester, you will be shot dead immediately. So what are they doing? They're yelling from their windows, death to the Khomeini and down with the regime from their windows so that they don't have to go down. I want to get your take on what we should be doing in that regard, because the government reportedly planning to permanently sever its citizens from the global internet. That's from the New York Post this morning, confirming that instead they wanted to have a state-run system as part of this crackdown on dissent. And then there's Greenland, the president with this bold idea. He is slapping tariffs on European nations right now, days before he's about to see many of them when he goes to Davos, Switzerland, for the World Economic Forum. Before he sees them, he's slapping tariffs on them until what he calls a complete acquisition, a complete and total acquisition of Greenland. Your reaction?
Well, let me take those one at a time. When it comes to communications, you're right that the Ayatollah is trying to do everything he can to silence the Iranian people and to keep them in a news blackout, is shutting down television, is shutting down internet, has shut down just about all TV, although I will say it's fairly amazing. The Ayatollah has been playing in Persian Tucker Carlson's podcast, which is just a stunning statement and a powerful indictment. I will say a real game changer on that is a decision that Elon Musk made to provide Starlink to Iran and provide it free of charge. That's transformational because you know what? The Ayatollah can't shut down Starlink, and it's letting the Iranian people speak. We're getting videos, bootleg videos that are coming out via Starlink. That's really important to be able to communicate. It's one of the many ways that America has to support those who are rising up against tyrannies. When it comes to Greenland, I want to commend President Trump for being single-mindedly focused on America first, on U.S. economic interest and U.S. national security interest. I believe it is overwhelmingly in America's national interest to acquire Greenland. A year ago, as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, I chaired a hearing on the benefits to the United States of America of acquiring Greenland. Now, some folks in the press, they clutch their pearls and they say, well, what do you mean acquiring Greenland? How could that happen? Look, the whole history of America has been a history of acquiring new lands and new territories. Whether you go back to Thomas Jefferson making the Louisiana Purchase, about half of the United States of America today, or you go back to America purchasing Alaska from Russia. You want to talk about, at the time they called it Seward's Folly. It turned out to be an extraordinarily consequential purchase. Greenland has massive rare earth minerals and critical minerals. There are enormous economic benefits to America. But it's also, like Alaska, it is located on the Arctic, which is a major theater for potential military conflict with either Russia or China. It's also critical for the Golden Dome and defending America from potential missile strikes. I commend the president for focusing on American national security.
Yeah, because where it is geographically can help stop any missile fire coming from adversaries like Russia and China. Senator, it's great to catch up. We so appreciate your time. We'll be watching your work as always, sir. Thank you. Senator Ted Cruz. More on Iran coming up this morning with Senator Bill Hagerty and former Deputy National Security Advisor for President Trump, Victoria Coates, coming up shortly. But first, this.
Mayor Fry and Governor Walz have been very clear that they're going to continue their rhetoric. They're going to continue to put criminals and corrupt illegal aliens above the people that live in that city and in that state. They've said they're not going to help us, so we'll make sure that we protect our officers, but we also follow through on making sure these criminals are brought to justice.
And that's Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem with me here last weekend exclusively as ICE agents are under attack in sanctuary cities across the country. President Trump is now threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act to quell the violent protests that are disrupting federal law enforcement from carrying out their duties to uphold the rule of law on illegal immigration. On Wednesday, 3 illegal immigrants from Venezuela who entered the U.S. during the Biden administration's wide open border were arrested for allegedly ambushing an ICE agent in Minneapolis. The ICE agent fired a defensive shot after the trio assaulted the agent with a snow shovel and a broom handle, according to Homeland Security. This is the second time in 2 weeks ICE was involved in a shooting in Minneapolis after the deadly shooting of Renee Good 2 weeks ago, as the Democrats fire up rhetoric to encourage citizens to resist ICE. Watch.
This is what we're saying, in that their expansion and explosion in the use of ICE has now gone away from immigration enforcement, and it's gone towards the attack and targeting of U.S. citizens.
Let's be very clear. I've seen conduct from ICE that is disgusting and is intolerable.
If you see these ICE agents in your neighborhood, take out that phone and hit record. Help us create a database of the atrocities against Minnesotans, not just to establish a record for posterity, but to bank evidence for future prosecution.
Now we are learning that the Justice Department is investigating both Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry for allegedly impending law enforcement. Joining me now is Director of ICE, Todd Lyons. Director, thanks very much for being here this morning. I want you to explain what has taken place here, because based on those comments that we just saw from those Democrats, it feels like the Democrats lit the match, and now they're trying to attack the agents who are doing their job. I mean, let's face it. These Democrats oversaw a wide open border where some criminals came in. 350 people on the terrorist watch list were encountered under Biden's years. And then they told citizens to get in the faces of ICE. When ICE reacted, now they're attacking ICE for doing their job. What is taking place here? Please tell us.
Hey, Maria, thanks for having me. So you're 100% right. So we started seeing this back in April, and I sent up the flare and started asking, elected officials not to stoke such dangerous rhetoric about ICE. And now exactly, you are seeing exactly what you just said. You've seen attacks on ICE officers and our other federal partners for only going out there and doing their law enforcement mission. We went to Minnesota on that criminal fraud case, over $9 billion that, Homeland Security investigations and the FBI were investigating. At the same time, we had more than 470 criminally illegal aliens this year alone since President Trump took office, re-released back into the communities. So we were out there focused on getting the worst of the worst. And if you look at our social media sites and see our press releases, you'll see consistently ICE agents and deportation officers have arrested murderers, gang members, serial rapists, people wanted from their home country for heinous crimes. Yet, unfortunately, you don't hear that. We're automatically assuming from elected officials that ICE is out there doing something wrong. And it's horrible for the fact that people say that ICE is now targeting U.S. citizens. That's not the case. We have to send more officers and agents just to protect the men and women that are out there trying to do their regular lawful law enforcement mission.
Is there a better way for you to communicate your priorities? In other words, that priority is taking down criminals in this country who are committing crime, who first committed the first crime of illegally coming into the country, but then have gone on to commit other crimes? Because the narrative that the Democrats are sending out there is that ICE is going down, breaking up families, taking people who are working hard, having people be afraid to go to work. Tell us your priorities, and can you prove to us that, in fact, your ICE agents are out there taking down criminality?
100%, Maria. If you go ahead and you look at what we've done since January 20th, 70% of all illegal aliens that ICE has arrested last year and going into this calendar year have criminal convictions or pending criminal charges or warrants or criminal histories back in their home country. And, we've been focused on those that have been lawfully ordered deported by an immigration judge who failed to leave. So there's about 1.5 billion individuals in the country that have been legally and lawfully ordered deported or removed from this country by a federal judge. Unfortunately, as much press as we do, as many releases as we put out, no one will pick up the fact that we are actually out there focused on our law enforcement mission. And the one thing we say all the time is, these sanctuary jurisdictions, you would not see this many ICE agents and special agents on the street focused on the criminally illegal alien mission if they would just turn people over to us. That's the key. Right. These local law enforcement agencies have already deemed these individuals a public safety threat and arrested them. Why not work with federal partners, turn them over to us, and let us get them out of our communities?
Well, I mean, I'm wondering if all of these attacks on our ICE agents have changed the way these agents are doing their job. What can you tell us about that? Is this stopping ICE agents or changing the way they're doing their jobs in any way, because they're worried that they're going to be under attack when they get in the middle of a situation?
Maria, you're right in the fact that it does change the mindset of the men and women of ICE. But that's why we have to provide them so much support. You hear about the 3,000 federal officers and special agents that deployed to Minneapolis. Majority of those, if not most, are to protect the men and women that are out there trying to make those arrests. And that has definitely changed our tactics. Where we would go and have 5 to 6 officers on an arrest team, now you have to go with 10 to 15 just to protect those individuals that are trying to arrest a bad guy. In my 30 years of law enforcement, I never thought we would have to send law enforcement to protect law enforcement. But I don't think you'd see as many of the issues if political leaders were allowed their local and state law enforcement to work with us.
Great point.
It's never a public safety issue to pit law enforcement against each other.
Of course. Really great point. Todd Lyons, thanks very much for being here with us. ICE Director Todd Lyons this morning. Thank you. And
Thanks,
now
Maria.
this week,
Dangerous man who's been at the center of power, working with Obama's top people. He's known as their henchman, the guy that they sent in, their fixer, so to speak. So whatever Jack Smith says in public, he actually means the opposite.
and that was former House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes with me here on Special Counsel Jack Smith, claiming that politics had no role in his prosecution of President Trump during closed-door testimony, congressional testimony last month. Jack Smith is now set to testify publicly this upcoming week in front of the House Judiciary Committee this Thursday, as Republicans are demanding answers on his criminal investigation into the president and the FBI's Arctic Frost investigation. Joining me now with more on this week's hearing is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jim Jordan. Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for being here. Can you tell us what to expect at this upcoming hearing on Thursday?
Well, one of the first questions I think we want to ask him is, you paid a confidential human source $20,000. Who's this individual? What'd you pay him for? Was this the only payment? Were there multiple payments? And maybe the big question is, why did you have to pay him? You're Jack Smith. You're the special counsel. You can subpoena and depose just about anybody you want. What were you doing paying this individual? What kind of information was he giving your investigation? So I think that's one of the many questions our committee will have for the special counsel. I mean, it starts to sound a little bit like 10 years ago when the Comey FBI was paying Christopher Steele, when they paid a foreigner to write this bogus document, the dossier that started this 10-year-long attack on President Trump we've seen from the left. So I think that's one of the key areas we'll ask him questions about. But yeah, we have Jack Smith, 10 o'clock Thursday, kind of the normal plan when every special counsel at some point comes in front of our committee, whether it was, Mueller or Durham or Robert Hur, we bring them in and we ask them questions so the country can see what was really going on in their investigation.
But I don't understand this. I mean, Congressman, why would the government and a special counsel pay someone $20,000 for information? If you go and talk to the government, you're under oath, right? You can't lie to the FBI. Why is he paying somebody $20,000 for information? Isn't that illegal?
Well, no, I mean, again, Christopher Steele was a confidential human source who they paid. So this is a practice they do. I don't know why Jack Smith did it, but this is one of the things we want to find out. But remember, Jack Smith was so determined to go get President Trump, he was willing to do all kinds of things. Think about this, Maria. Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker on January 7th, 2023. 16 days later, Jack Smith goes and gets his phone records from 2 years prior for a 2-month time frame, from Election Day 2020 until January 7th, 2021. The Speaker of the House, the top Republican in government, the guy second in line to the president, Jack Smith goes and gets his phone records. And guess what else he does? He tells the court, don't let the carrier, don't let AT&T tell the customer, the Speaker of the House, don't let him know that we've got his phone logs, that the Biden administration and Jack Smith has his phone logs. They know who he called, who called him, when the call took place, how long it lasted, and if Kevin initiated the call, they know where he was at when he did so. You can pattern a person's life. And the reason they gave the judge for putting the gag order on this was because they said, oh, he might be a flight risk. He might tamper with evidence. The Speaker of the House is going to be a flight risk? You got to be kidding me. That was the degree Jack Smith was willing to go to try to get President Trump and try to keep President Trump from being our president.
Well, this is all so extraordinary. I mean, if the Democrats are going to treat the Speaker of the House in this manner, imagine what they're going to do to ordinary citizens in terms of our own protections and information. Yeah. But they also got your phone, right? They had your phone records. You were the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and still are. What happened to you?
Well, no, they went after mine for 2.5 years. Of course, they went after a number of senators. I mean, again, I think this just shows the degree Jack Smith was willing to go. Now, here's the good news. He got slapped down in court multiple times. The gag order he put on President Trump, the appellate court said, no, you got to narrow that tremendously. You can't. In fact, the Washington Post did a opinion piece on this from the editorial board a week and a half ago, where they said Jack Smith went way too far in his attack on the First Amendment when he put the gag order on President Trump. So he got slapped down by the appellate court. Of course, he got slapped down by the United States Supreme Court on President Trump having immunity for his official duties. I think all that will come out in this investigation or this hearing. But I think what it'll really show is Jack Smith was just a continuation of everything we've seen for a decade. They spied on President Trump's campaign. Then it was Mueller, impeachment 1, impeachment 2, Alvin Bragg, Fani Willis, Jack Smith, a nonstop attack to keep the guy we the people wanted to be president of the United States, to keep him from getting that position. That's what I think this will really show.
10 years of conspiracy, but I think it's really interesting to see how he used corporate America to do his dirty work, because it wasn't just AT&T and Verizon that he wanted the phone records. He also sent subpoenas to JP Morgan so that JP Morgan can send over banking records of President Trump and of Republicans. Now, I asked JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon about that, and I said, did you send over banking records and debank President Trump? And what Jamie said to me is like, look, we all have to grow up. He said, we follow the law. We got a subpoena. We got a subpoena to send over bank records. And when we get a subpoena, we're going to follow it. So what do you do about that? I mean, you're the chairman of judiciary. You're an elected official. Can you stop the political weaponization from the other side using corporate America to do the dirty work? President Trump did a post this weekend, and he said he's going to be suing JP Morgan within the next 2 weeks as a result of getting debanked.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, you know, that the government realizes they went too far in things they did, because now the policy at the Justice Department has been changed when it comes to getting members of Congress's phone logs. You can't just go do that now. You've got to tell the judge, hey, judge, this is actually this phone number that we're asking you to give us the logs on. This actually belongs to a member of a separate and equal branch of government. So there's some progress being made there. As you know, we've passed legislation in our committee that's now in the United States Senate that puts limits on what these judges can do when they issue injunctions, that these injunctions can't apply nationwide. They can only apply to the parties in the case in that respective jurisdiction. So we're trying to push back in every way we possibly can.
Progress, but we want to see accountability for these dirty tricks. Congressman, we'll be watching your work. Thanks very much, sir. We'll see you on Thursday. Congressman Jim Jordan leading that hearing of Jack Smith. We'll be right back with Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty. Stay with us. Senator Lindsey Graham with me here last weekend, urging President Trump to take decisive action against Iran's brutal regime. The president said on Friday that Iran canceled the execution of over 800 political prisoners as it continues to monitor the protests, which began late last month over Iran's failing economy and the president's crippling sanctions. But the pain lingers as thousands have already been killed for protesting on the streets. Joining me now in the Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is Senate Foreign Relations Committee member, Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee. Senator, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. I want to get your take on foreign affairs as well as domestic policy with regard to ICE, what you heard from Todd Lyons a moment ago. First, let's take on Iran. Your reaction to President Trump's treatment of this issue. Do you believe the president should, in fact, take more aggressive action against the Iranian leadership?
I do, and we've seen what happens when we fail to do so. Under President Obama, rather than take aggressive action when Iranians were in the streets, really looking and searching for the type of leadership that President Trump is now delivering, what did Obama do? He remained silent and turned around and handed them billions of dollars, pallets of cash in return for this so-called Iran deal that was a massive failure. We had them at their knees in 2020. I worked on an aspect of it when I was ambassador to Japan, stopping all oil purchases by the Japanese from the Iranians. The maximum pressure program was working. John Kerry then steps in, the former Secretary of State, tells the Iranians, wait, see what happens with the election. Guess what? Joe Biden comes into office and immediately relaxes the enforcement of sanctions. Money begins to flow back to Iran. Terror breaks out in the Middle East. We know what happens when America leadership is not there, when we're not present. Yeah. President Trump is stepping up, and in fact, stepping up in a major ways, backing it up with movements of carrier strike groups into the region. I think the Ayatollahs better be listening very carefully to President Trump.
Yeah, and I feel like many of the president's moves are also messages to communist China. We're going to talk with Victoria Coates in a few minutes, and she points out that there are massive amounts of smaller fishing boats right now in the South China Sea. Maybe they're there to harass, obstruct shipping lanes. We're going to talk about that. But China has been able to infiltrate the United States in ways that no one has ever expected or understood. President Trump understands this. Do you believe some of these moves, whether it be wanting to acquire Greenland to protect America from China and Russia, or going into Venezuela and extracting Nicolas Maduro, or the activity for Iran. Is this partly to send a message to our number one adversary, Communist China?
Maria, you're always so good on seeing China for what it is. And I think President Trump would agree with you. He's playing the long game.
Yeah.
There are geostrategic implications for everything that's happening longer term here. If you think about Iran and Venezuela, their illicit oil is being purchased primarily by China. That illicit oil is now coming under U.S. control. That's going to have a major impact on China. You think about China competing against us with rare earth minerals. We're going to control the flow of oil. It's not about producing the oil as much as it is about controlling it. And with oil under control, and Venezuelan oil under American control, I think we see what's happening in Iran. There is a change underway right now. And if you think about the movements in Greenland, again, long-term geostrategic implications there. China, the East China Sea, the South China Sea, again, the boats, the harassment that's going on. President Trump has re-engaged with Japan in a way that shows even greater strength. I was the ambassador to Japan back when Prime Minister Abe was in office. I now see Prime Minister Takaichi and President Trump taking the relationship even further. China hates this. Long-term, Japan is the strongest partner we could possibly have in the region. President Trump is definitely playing the long game from a geostrategic standpoint, and he's winning.
And I love what's going on in Japan right now. It is just flourishing, and you're seeing lots of tourism and excitement and participation in the prime minister's agenda there. But I want to take you back to the United States right now and take a look at the president's priorities here. He came out with a list of things in the last 100 days: a ban on large institutional investors purchasing single-family homes, $200 billion purchase of mortgage-backed securities, a 10% cap on credit card interest rates, the idea that he's going to announce next week in Davos that you could now tap into your 401k to buy a home. These are all efforts that he is trying to put out to make it easier on citizens' affordability. But at the same time, you've got Democrats getting in the faces of ICE. And I know you worked with leadership in Memphis and really saw a change in terms of what can be done if you're working together with the local leadership there. Very different than what's happening right now in Minnesota.
The contrast couldn't be more stark, Maria. You see what happens when you've got a local mayor in Minneapolis, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, encouraging citizens to resist federal authorities, to not cooperate. And what you have is bedlam in the streets. You have citizens driving into ICE agents. You have non-citizens, people here illegally, trying to attack ICE agents. And you have somehow these protesters advocating for the illegal people here, the ones that are criminals. You heard Todd Lyons. You had a great interview with Todd earlier. The 70% of these people that they're arresting are criminals. And now the job has become much more difficult in places like Minneapolis. Look at what happened in my home state of Memphis. I began working with the local mayor back in 2024. Governor Lee, a Republican, stepping up here in Tennessee, cooperating. Local leadership in Memphis cooperating. And what's happened? We've arrested over 5,000 criminals on the streets of Memphis. Memphis had become, on a per capita basis, the murder capital of America in 2023. And that has changed dramatically. And it's all because of local cooperation with federal authorities. We've got 16 different federal agencies working hand in glove with local authorities in Memphis right now. Memphis is becoming one of the safest cities in America.
Wow.
What a contrast versus Minneapolis.
And what a contrast to where it was, because I remember that Kash Patel, in my interview with him last year, said that one of those areas in Tennessee was actually the homicide capital of the country.
Yes.
But the work that you've done working with local officials and obviously the FBI and Kash Patel has changed that as well. Senator, it's great to catch up. Thanks very much for your work.
Thank you, Maria.
Senator Bill Hagerty in Tennessee. Up next, the first U.S. sale of Venezuelan oil in the books, valued at $500 million, with additional sales expected soon. Former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, Victoria Coates, is here on Venezuela, Iran, and President Trump's efforts to communist China as well, countering their aggression. Next, the very latest developments out of Venezuela this morning after CIA Director John Ratcliffe met with acting Venezuelan President Delcy Rodriguez on Thursday. Joining me now with more is former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, Victoria Coates. Victoria, thanks so much for being here to talk about President Trump's foreign policy. And I wonder if taking out Maduro, the way that President Trump did, has galvanized the people on the ground in Iran. Your reaction?
Oh, I think that it definitely has. We were honored to host the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, at Heritage on Friday for a press conference, and she spoke so movingly about what President Trump's action meant to her personally, to her country of Venezuela. She had given him the Nobel Peace Prize that she had received in honor of his work around the world. And clearly, the people of Iran understand that the president of the United States can reach out and touch a dictator anytime he wants to. That should be a very strong message to the supreme leader, especially after President Trump ordered that B-2 bombing last June.
And also, the president was very clear over the weekend saying it is time for new leadership in Iran. What do you want to see the U.S. do at this point?
Well, there are a range of actions the president could potentially take. First and foremost, he's moving at least one, if not two, aircraft carrier strike groups back into the region. And as far as I'm concerned, that's 4.5 square acres of sovereign U.S. territory, wherever President Trump wants it to be. So that's a very powerful message. the Iranians know they're defenseless. He can also take cyber attacks against their failing banks. As we've discussed, their economic system is in free fall. He could do targeted strikes on their oil export facilities. And finally, he can attack their horrible national information network, that internet control device imported from China that they're using to keep the Iranian people dark. You can attack that infrastructure as well.
That's an important point. All right, I want to get your take on all of this and what it means for communist China and what's going on the ground there with all of these fishing boats in the South China Sea right now. Let's take a break and then get into it more with former Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates in just a moment on Sunday Morning Futures. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And we're back with Heritage Foundation Vice President of National Security, Victoria Coates. Victoria, I want to get your take on the masses of these small fishing boats right now in the South China Sea. What is going on right now? Why this big increase in small boats in that region, in your view?
Well, Maria, this is the craziest story that's flying under the radar today. The Chinese have massed some 1,400 small fishing boats in a formation in the South China Sea to harass shipping through that vital shipping communication route. And this is something we haven't seen before. And, they're just doing commercial shipping. These are just small fishermen out in their boats. Absolutely not. The PRC has weaponized this. This was the largest civilian naval demonstration I can remember ever taking place. And you have ships having to go around them. They couldn't block an American warship, but they can certainly make things extremely difficult. And if this is just a dry run for what they have planned, we have to be looking at this with as much seriousness as we take their building their fake islands and everything else they're doing to try to exert dominance over the South China Sea.
Well, that's exactly right. And President Trump understands that. And that's why I feel in some cases, some of President Trump's moves, whether it's in Venezuela and the oil there or Iran, are messages to the Chinese leadership. I mean, this massive Chinese penetration in Venezuela, in the South China Sea, it goes beyond the oil sector, right? They control the country's telecom with Huawei and ZTE. The CCP and the PLA have also captured the country's space sector as well. They want to dominate in space because that's where our satellites are. Do we need to start anew, different programs in these sectors and beyond from a U.S. policy standpoint?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what the president's doing. That's why this $1.5 trillion historic defense budget that he's forecasted for next year is so critically important. This is the United States putting our economic muscle behind the systems, the programs that we need to keep the United States safe. It reminds me of the 1980s when Ronald Reagan did this with the Soviet Union. They couldn't keep up. And that's what ended the Cold War. This can end the new Cold War with China.
Great point. Victoria, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Victoria Coates, former National Security Advisor. That'll do it for us on Sunday Morning Futures. Make sure to join me all next week. I'll be live from Davos on Mornings with Maria, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern.
All right. Remember to give the video a thumbs up. With that said, see you in the next video. Peace.